Picture yourself drawing a heavy wool cloak around your shoulders on a frosty morning in the 13th century. That fabric did not roll out of a thunderous factory, nor did it come from iron machines clattering at breakneck speed. Instead, each strand was born from careful hands, spun with patience, guided by wooden looms, and shaped by the slow rhythm of human effort. Sometimes days, sometimes long months were needed before simple fibres turned into usable cloth. But how did medieval weavers, living without even a shadow of modern machinery, manage to transform raw wool, flax, hemp, or precious silk into the textiles that clothed their world? In Europe of the Middle Ages, cloth was not just something to cover the body. It was the fabric of existence itself. From the rough homespun tunics worn by peasants to the shimmering silks draped over kings and bishops, textiles surrounded every layer of society. Cloth warmed people through long winters, marked one's rank in rigid social hierarchies, and even carried spiritual meaning when shaped into vestments, altar cloths, or banners used in sacred rituals. Textiles were in such demand that they shaped entire villages and towns. In rural homes, families worked together to spin and weave what they needed. In towns, however, weaving became a livelihood, drawing artisans into crowded workshops where the thump of looms echoed day and night. Cloth even acted as money. Bolts of fabric were exchanged for goods, taxes, and trade. Flemish wool in particular became so valuable that it underpinned entire economies, linking shepherds, merchants, and monarchs alike. Cloth also carried symbolic power. Medieval laws, the sumptuary codes, dictated what materials and colours each class could wear, ensuring that garments mirrored society's rigid ranks. A velvet cloak or a silk veil announced privilege instantly. Monasteries too saw textiles as devotion made visible, painstakingly crafted for altars or processions. To weave was never a minor craft. It was survival, economy, and faith bound together. Before any loom could be put to use, raw fibres had to be transformed into thread. In northern Europe, wool was king. Peasants sheared sheep each spring, then scoured the fleece in rivers or troughs, scrubbing away grease and dirt. Linen drawn from flax required even greater effort. Stalks pulled from the ground, soaked in water to rot away the soft tissue, then beaten to free the fibres. Hemp followed a similar path, yielding coarse but durable strands. For the wealthy, silk arrived via long, dangerous trade routes from Byzantium and later Italy, shimmering with rarity. Each material brought its own trials. Wool needed carding, where wooden paddles combed out tangles and aligned fibres. Flax demanded retting and scutching, messy work that left fields smelling of rot. These tasks were exhausting and often communal, with families or entire villages lending hands. By the time fibres reached a spinner, countless hours of hidden labour had already been poured into them. What looked like a single thread was in truth the product of earth, animal, and endless human effort. Spinning stood at the heart of this chain, and it was overwhelmingly the work of women. Using the humble drop spindle, a small weighted stick twirled by hand, they twisted raw fibres into thread. The tool was slow but portable. Women could spin while tending children, walking, or watching livestock. By the 13th century, spinning wheels began to appear, faster but still uncommon in many rural corners. Even with better tools, the task remained painfully slow. Producing yarn for a single garment could take weeks of relentless spinning. The word spinster, once a neutral label for a woman who spun yarn, eventually became tied to unmarried women. So deeply did this work define female identity. And spinning required not just time, but skill. Twist the fibres too tightly and the thread snapped. Too loosely and it fell apart. Fingers had to feel the perfect balance of strength and softness. For medieval families, spinning was not optional housework. It was survival itself. Without thread, there was no cloth. Without cloth, there was no warmth. The steady hum of spindles filled villages, an invisible heartbeat of daily life. Once yarn was ready, weaving could begin. The earliest design in Europe was the warp-weighted loom, an upright frame where heavy stones held vertical threads taut. The weaver passed a shuttle carrying the weft back and forth, beating each row into place with a wooden sword. Over time, horizontal looms spread across Europe, offering tighter weave and greater control. Their structure was simple: a strong wooden frame, heddles to lift alternating warp threads, and a beater to press the weft firmly into fabric. When at work, the loom became alive with sound. The thump of the beater, the swoosh of the shuttle, the creak of the frame. These rhythms filled cottages and workshops alike, echoing across medieval towns. But weaving was no gentle pastime. It demanded strength to drive the beater, keen eyes to watch the shuttle, and a patient mind to endure the monotony of repetition. Errors could ruin weeks of work, forcing the weaver to undo everything. In villages, a loom might take up half a cottage. In towns, entire workshops housed rows of them, their wooden chorus never silent. The loom, powered entirely by human muscle and persistence, was the machine of the Middle Ages. At its core lay the dance of warp and weft. Warp threads stretched tight like the bones of the fabric, while the weft threads filled the gaps, binding structure into being. The simplest method, plain weave, produced strong, balanced cloth suitable for everyday wear. More ambitious weavers used twill, where the weft passed over multiple warps before dipping under. This created diagonal ridges, the familiar pattern of cloaks and trousers, both stronger and more flexible. Variations like herringbone or diamonds emerged, bringing subtle artistry even into modest cloth. For the wealthy, complex weaves like brocades and damasks dazzled, often worked with multiple shuttles and threads of gold or silk. These textiles gleamed in cathedrals and royal courts, outward signs of privilege, yet even the most elaborate velvet or silk still rested on the same principles: warp, weft, shuttle, beater, repetition. Weaving was both mathematics and craft, the spacing of threads and sequence of lifts determining the outcome. Skilled weavers carried these patterns in memory, their hands repeating them like second nature. Every finished piece, whether coarse homespun or jewelled brocade, was a record of patience, memory and precision. Once cloth came off the loom, its journey was not yet finished. Colour and finishing gave textiles their final character. Natural dyes, coaxed from plants, minerals and even insects, infused fabrics with meaning and identity. Woad indigo created deep blues, madder roots gave red, weld produced yellow, while rare cochineal and kermes yielded brilliant crimson reserved for elites. Achieving a deep black was notoriously difficult, a mark of wealth and authority. Dyeing was equal parts science and art. Cloth was steeped in vast cauldrons over open fires, stirred with poles, then fixed with mordants like alum or even fermented urine. Too much heat and colours burned dull, too little, and shades emerged weak. After dyeing came fulling, a process that pounded and washed wool to tighten the weave and remove oils, leaving it dense and durable. Fabrics might then be brushed with teasels, raising a soft nap, or pressed flat for smoothness. A bright bolt of red wool, a deep indigo cloak, or a golden-dyed linen tunic could turn necessity into beauty. These colours carried weight, marking professions, wealth, and piety. When placed beside today's machines, medieval weaving seems a world apart. Modern power looms, governed by computers, produce miles of fabric in minutes, but the basic logic remains unchanged. Warp stretched taut, weft carried across, pattern built by repetition. The ancient loom and the modern factory share a skeleton of the same rhythm. What has changed is speed and scale. One medieval weaver might spend weeks producing cloth for a single tunic. A factory now can turn out thousands of meters in a day. Industrialization made fabric cheap and widespread, but severed it from the intimacy of handwork. Each medieval thread once carried the imprint of its maker. Today, that human touch is mostly gone. And yet, hand weaving has not disappeared. Across the world, artisans and historians keep old looms alive, treasuring the irregularities and small imperfections that machines erase. Weaving was never just craft, it was economy. In rural households, woven cloth could pay rents or taxes. In growing cities, weaving shops thrived, employing apprentices, masters, and entire families. Weaving guilds set standards, guarded trade secrets, and ensured fair practices. Their regulations made cloth from certain towns a mark of guaranteed quality. Some regions became famous for excellence. Flanders dominated fine wool. Florence and Lucca dazzled Europe with silks and velvets. English wool exports enriched the crown and financed wars. Cloth itself often became money, traded for spices, metals, or horses. Royal treasuries stored not only gold, but also rich fabrics, valued as highly as coin. Wealth, cathedrals, and wars were built on the profits of weaving. Behind these grand events were the unseen weavers whose labour spun raw fibre into the wealth of nations. The weaver's life was both humble and central. In villages, looms often dominated one-room cottages, their sound mingling with children's cries and crackling hearths. Families worked together, women spinning, children winding bobbins, men handling the loom. In towns, professional guilds offered both support and demands, requiring dues, enforcing quality, even calling members to civic duty. For the ambitious, guilds brought respect, though merchants who sold finished cloth often grew far richer than those who wove it. The work was relentless. Hours bent over looms strained muscles and eyes, yet the pride was real. A well-made fabric carried not only warmth but dignity. Even plain cloth bore quiet artistry. Subtle diagonal weaves, careful spacing, small flourishes hidden in the pattern. The medieval weaver balanced survival with beauty, leaving traces of individuality in each bolt. Centuries later, their legacy remains. Museums hold fragile fragments, altar cloths, embroidered banners, robes once gleaming with devotional power. Each faded thread still tells a story of faith, labour and resilience. In heritage workshops and folk schools, plain weave, twill and tapestry are still taught. Some communities continue spinning wool, flax and hemp by hand, preserving knowledge passed down across generations. Hand-woven fabrics breathe differently, retain warmth in unique ways, and bear irregularities that mark them as human-made. These are not flaws but signatures, reminders that real hands once touched and shaped them. The story of medieval weaving, then, is more than craft. It is a story of connection. Threads linked fields and flocks to workshops and markets, joined peasants to kings, bound communities through trade and devotion. These threads wrapped shepherds and monarchs alike, demanded patience and resilience, and carried meaning far beyond utility. Even now, to study or practice medieval weaving is to touch that legacy, to feel in the rhythm of shuttle and loom the pulse of an age when fabric was treasure, labour was devotion, and every thread mattered.